There's a lot of concern that this is just the rhetoric is very difficult, is very problematic, a bit like poking the bear with a stick in a way. Do you view it as being helpful?
Not particularly, but look, I'm not a security expert. I haven't had access to all the information that governments have had. My impression, and this is purely a personal impression, that the current situation with a lot of drama and rhetoric and threats, it actually suits Mr. Putin. I think he'd rather be in this position than actually having to fight. And it also suits our own leaders who, are very much part of they've got more solidarity. They're distracting from their domestic problems. I mean, it suits Messrs. Biden, Johnson, Putin, and everybody else involved that we stay at this sort of heightened level of drama without actually any fighting. But if there were fighting, I mean, it could be very serious. Of course, our own soldiers are not involved because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We have no military obligations, but the economic fallout could be very considerable. I mean, not just through the energy shock, but if sanctions are applied, they will also have an impact on our own country because of companies that are dealing with Russian companies, which are then blocked. Also from the shock of our stock markets and so on, which are already very nervous because of rising interest rates. I mean, all of this is going to feed into a bit of a crisis of confidence in financial markets. So my assessment, for what it's worth, is that this confrontational rhetoric is probably as far as it's going to get, but we need to be prepared for the worst.
Many of our viewers have written in saying this could have been avoided if we had gone to the trouble of trying to understand Russia's fears over a growing NATO. Do you think that's true?
Well, there's an element of truth in that. I mean, quite apart from Putin's own personal agenda, I mean, there is a lot of bad feeling in Russia about the claim that we took advantage of them when the Soviet Union collapsed. But I think, Putin is just using that. I mean, it's not this issue has been rumbling on for 20-odd years. He just happens to find it convenient now to sort of stoke the fire. But there is that underlying problem, and if this crisis settles down, we're going to have to find a way of addressing it.
I mean, these are very serious issues. I mean, whether people's priority is Ukraine and the effect that any conflict could bring to us here in the UK and even on a global scale, or whether their primary concerns are how to, boil the kettle or buy the food, whatever it may be. These are serious issues. Now, there's still a lot of media attention and political attention on the whole Partygate thing. What's your view? I mean, do we need to just move past that now?
Well, unfortunately for the Prime Minister, he can't just move on. I mean, the Sue Great report hasn't yet been publicly published in its full form. The Metropolitan Police haven't followed through on their investigation yet. I think there's much more to come. And if the Prime Minister is found to have knowingly broken the law, he is in an impossible position and almost certainly will have to go. So it's not a question of just moving on. That's a little too kind of facile.
Other pressing domestic issues, of course, is COVID and the fact that, all of the newspapers today are saying that defiant Boris will axe all COVID rules and that could happen as soon as Thursday. What are your thoughts? Too much too soon, or do you think it is about time?
Well, I generally welcome the relaxation, and in terms of our private lives, it's now becoming much easier. What I do feel uncomfortable about is at the beginning of the pandemic, we had these daily briefings from the Director of Public Health and others advising us on the next step, and they've sort of suddenly disappeared. I think it would be helpful if the public health professionals were still there and still the government was still guided by what they're saying. I think there's a bit of a feeling that the government is looking for a political bounce in its current difficulties, and this kind of sudden lifting of controls will help them. I mean, I hope it works. I mean, think that things certainly feel easier. People are mixing more, people are going back to work, and that's all good. But, we could, if we're not careful, we could relapse back into another round of the pandemic. I mean, particularly if some new variant emerges, as it well could.
Got to learn in terms of living with COVID. I mean, we really do have to learn to live with it, don't we? I mean, we can't continue restrictions. I mean, no matter how small, we can't keep them going indefinitely.
No, and I do fear for what's happening in some countries that are still operating at high alert. I mean, one of the reasons the state of tension exists with China is, of course, they're completely quarantined and have this extraordinarily severe controls, and they're going to have to be lifted at some point, and they don't seem ready for it. So yeah, we are going to have to live with it, and we're going to have to adjust. But there is still an argument for taking basic precautions over social distancing or whatever. I mean, I happen to have a base at a university in London, and every time I go in a building, my mobile phone is checked as to whether I've had a test within the last 4 days. I mean, that strikes me a bit extreme, but a lot of institutions are still on guard, and I think we have to just try and not pretend that this has gone away. It hasn't.
Before we let you go away to your Sunday morning, I see you're in the New Forest at the moment. How has the storm been around you?
Well, a few trees have come down surrounding the farm where I am, but it's nothing like the real horror stories. I think it was 1987 was the real drama. Nothing like that. But yeah, there are trees down on the road, and it's been sensible to stay inside, which get on with some work.